Saludos, it's your host, Gabe Morales. Today I'm going to do a roll call of Mexican Mafia members. Now, I realize there's sometimes some difference of opinion on who is a made member, who is a dropout, and who is just an associate or a camarada. Let me say one thing here. I know there's a lot of people out there that have some good knowledge about the Mexican Mafia, but there's nobody that I know that knows absolutely everything about La M. Not one person. And once again, I do encourage constructive criticism. However, if you just want to be a hater, then you will get a YouTube removal from the yard. Your comment will be taken down and you will be banned from further viewing. Most of my information came from my mentor, who was the founder of the California Prison Gang Task Force, originally called the Monterey Park Gang Task Force, after a Mexican Mafia murder was discovered there. And that would be Robert Mocoverde Morel, who passed away almost exactly 6 years ago. Once again, nobody knows everything. The California Department of Corrections did not even start validating Mexican Mafia members and other prison gangs until the late 1970s. So before that, really is only guesstimation. I will do my best to show pictures of these individuals. I will not state their current status unless I verify they're already deceased, or I will note that this has been put out in the news media. I do talk to a lot of present investigators, former investigators, active gang members, and former gang members. But I keep my sources confidential, or I wouldn't have any sources. So here we go. Let's get started. I have documentation of Mexican Mafia members with the last name of A, continuing as long as I can until I run out of time today. The first one I have is Frankie Abeles, who is from Chino. I have documentation he did a murder in the late 1970s. He had a C and a D number, and he was still active in the mid-1990s, and I believe was last on San Quentin's death row, but no longer shows being there, according to my documentation. I also have Richard Acosta, also known as Pato. He had a C number and was involved in the Mexican Mafia in the early 1990s through about 2004. There was also Robert Bebop Acosta. I think he may have been from San Diego, but I'm not sure. I believe he committed multiple murders during Operation Black Hand and is now deceased. There was Vincent Chente Acosta from Orange County. I believe he was involved in 2 cop murders, and I show that he is still incarcerated in CDC. There was Acadio Edimonson Acuna from the Cuca Aces. I had him as a Mexican Mafia member in the Violence Control Unit of New Folsom Prison in 1991. After that, he was sent to the Pelican Bay SHU. There was also Victor Terco Acuna from Basse Grande and was an active Mexican Mafia through the 2000s, was housed at Pelican Bay, then moved to High Desert State Prison, and he was involved in the Grajeda Brothers War and the movie against Artie Guzman. David Speedy Adair was from Bell Gardens, and he had a B number. He entered the California Youth Authority in 1972, escaped, and was sent to the adult system, whereby he became a MA member in the mid-70s. He paroled in 1976, did a robbery in 1977, where he came back on a B number, and I lost track of him after the early 90s. Locone Adi had a D number. He was from San Diego. And I remember he was also a MA hitman in the Violence Control Unit at New Folsom in the early 90s, and then later was let out. G.I. Joe Aguero was from Shelltown, San Diego. He had an E number and was also a hitman in the Violence Control Unit, where he had many Mexican Mafia members and some Aryan Brotherhood members in A5, New Folsom. There was Arturo Casper Aguilar from Highland Park, who was part of the Weddle Shyrock car. He was involved in the MA in the early 90s, and was sent to the federal BOP. And I show he was released from there in the late 90s. There was Donald Sluggo Aguilar from Orange County. My documentation shows that he was part of the Sanacar. Paul Spider Aguilar was either from the eastern part of LA County or possibly Basse Grande or Redlands out in San Bernardino County. He had an E number, and I show that he committed some murders in 1990, was sent to Folsom, and then Pelican Bay, where he still resides. Rob Bosco Aguilar was from Chino. I show he had a D number, and I think he may have been documented as an MA member in Nevada Department of Corrections. Alex Pee Wee Aguirre is from the Avenues and was very involved in the RICO case against the MA in the 1980s. He did time at Old Folsom, and I had him at New Folsom in the late 80s on B Yard. He paroled in July 1990 and was quickly popped for dope and given a K number. Pee Wee ended up going into the Fed system after the RICO case. Did time at Marion and time at the ADX. Somehow he was able to get out of the ADX and get shipped out to Victorville near his power base and understand that he took the keys as soon as he hit the yard. He is doing life. Mangas Aguirre was from Corona, but I also have documentation that he was close to Oyo Soto, which would have been Topo Peter's barrio. Mangas had an A number, was active in the MA in the 1960s, and I showed that he died in the late 1960s of an overdose. David Borrego Aguirre was from La Rana. He had a B number and a C number. I showed that he was MA in the 1970s and was shot at San Quentin after he was involved in a fight with the BGF in 1974. I believe he is now deceased. Frank Pancho Aguirre was also from La Rana. I think he may have been the younger brother of David. He had a C number and was made MA in the late 1970s. He may have been shipped to Pelican Bay. I'm not sure about that, but I show he's no longer in custody, at least under the C number. Joe Troubles Aguirre was from Bell Garden in a gang called the Brats. I show he was MA around 2016 and was collecting taxes for one of the Garules, who ended up being killed after he went to the house of a major drug dealer in Carson. He is currently housed at Pelican Bay. Mo Aguirre was from Maravilla, and according to Moco, he was the director of a program called Lucha in 1973 and ordered killings on behalf of the Mexican Mafia. Richard Little One Aguirre is sometimes called Psycho. Understand he doesn't like to be called that. He prefers Rich or Richard. He is the brother of Alex Pee Wee Aguirre. Richard has a C number and was made MA about 2002. He is currently housed at High Desert Prison and has been there since at least 2016. Robert Old Man Rob Aguirre is from La Habra. He has an H number and is actually not that old. He's only 51 and currently housed at Folsom State Prison, having previously spent some time at Pelican Bay SHU. Robert Maggi Aguirre had a B number. I'm not sure where he was from, but he was MA at least in the late 1970s. Johnny Alcala was from Ontario Black Angels. He was made MA in the mid-90s with an E number, then was released, came back with a V number, and spent some time at Corcoran. He is currently housed at Folsom State Prison. Ben Termite Aldama is from Casablanca, which is an old barrio out of Riverside. He had a B number, and I have documented that he was still MA in the mid-90s. Alejandro Catana Alfaro was actually from Salinas, and one of the first Soreno gangs there called Las Posadas. We actually had some Las Posadas gang members up in Seattle when I worked at the King County Jail after I left New Folsom in 93. Katana had a G number, and I show that he was MA at Pleasant Valley State Prison as of 2021. Antonio Palitos Almaguer is from Chino, where the California Institution for Men is, and where my mother-in-law started out working as a CO. She was the one actually got me to apply for the California Department of Corrections after I got out of the Marine Corps in 1986, and I started working at Folsom Prison in 1987. Palitos had an N number, which means that he was at the California Rehab Center in Norco, nearby where he's from. He was MA in the mid-90s, and I lost track of him after that. Joaquin Quino Alvarado was from LA, and I showed that he was in the LA County Jail in the early 90s. I'm not sure if he was MA. Raul Spie Alvarado is from Lenox, and he had an H number. He was involved in the murder of Danny Popeye Roman at SATF in 2020. I believe he was moved to Kern Valley State Prison after that, and I show he's no longer in custody, so he may be deceased or moved out of state. Alfonso Apache Alvarez was from Primera Flats. He had an A number and was a Mexican Mafia member who used to hang out at the Triste Hombre bar. He ended up trying to extort the wrong people and was killed by Alfie Sosa and Kilroy Roybal. His body was left then at Monterey Park. I've been to the exact spot where his body laid, as seen here, and shown to me by Moco. His murder actually spawned the first California Gang Task Force. I actually have two Anthony Alvarez as being MA. One had an A number and was born in 1941. I show was MA in the mid-60s. There also was Antonio Alvarez that was from Harpies, the same gang as Danny Popeye Roman. And I show that he was MA at the California Rehab Center in Norco. Armando Mondo Alvarez had a B number, and I show that he was MA in the early 70s. Danny Alvarez was from Almonte Hicks, which is the same barrio that my wife's dad is from. He had a D number. I show that he was MA at the LA County Jail in the late 90s. I'm not sure what happened to him after that, but I think he got moved to SATF Corcoran, and I lost any track of him after that. Roberto Chino Alvarez was a Mexican Mafia member in the mid-60s, and I show that he was housed at Folsom in the mid-70s. He may have been related to Raymond Bevito Alvarez, who was from Bakers. Bevito started off with an A number and was a major player at Folsom Prison. He was involved in the murder of a BGF member named Dopey Dan in 1969 at San Quentin's Adjustment Center, and was sponsored by Sano Ojeda at Folsom in 1972. He got out, returned with a C number, and was still involved in MMA politics at Folsom Prison, but ended up aligning himself with Kilroy Roybal in his war against Joe Morgan. Of course, Kilroy lost that one, and Bevito went down with him. Oscar Alvarez Torres was from Bolen Parque. I showed that he was an MA member in the feds. Now, you have to understand, not all federal MA are recognized in the state, and not all state MA are always recognized in the feds. Robert Lee Casper Alvari was from LA, but I also show was involved in a murder in Bakersfield. He had a B number and was MA after 1972 when he committed a murder in 1991, most likely for the organization, but I don't have details on that. He may have won on appeal because he was released and then came back on a J number. And I show that he was out of custody as of 2012, and I lost track of him after that. Luis, a.k.a. Weasel Avidres, was from San Bernardino. He had a C number and was MA in the mid-90s. Crispin Conejo was from Barrio Grape Watts, the same barrio that Roland Berry is from. He was made MA in the federal system. He was indicted on the number 2 RICO case and was released in April 2016. Fernando Cuate Alvidres was from West Covina. He was involved in an attempted murder in 1994 in Pomona, California, where my wife's family's from. He was given a J number and then indicted on the 3rd RICO and sent to the feds. He was released in October 2011. Mario Smokey Alvarez, I show, is from Fresno and LA, as well as roots in Mexico. He had an H number and was made MA around 2004, and I think he was validated at Pelican Bay. I show he's no longer in custody. George Chuco Amado was from Hazard. He was one of the first inmates I had at New Folsom Sea Yard. He had a C number and was heavily involved in drugs, but somehow got in trouble with the MA. He is one of the more pleasant inmates I dealt with. Ramon Ponce Amado was from a barrio named Mateo 38th Street, which is now defunct. And I also show that he had ties to Compton. He had an A number, one of the early MA members made in the early 60s. He was also involved in the shoe war in September 1968 and was one of the individuals who hit Lips Valdez from the Nuez Familia. Steve Calote Amador was from Wilmas, and he married a Puerto Rican attorney that worked for La M named Donna James. I actually know the couple who witnessed this marriage, who are both lawyers that for a while lived in Seattle, but originally are from San Jose. He joined the MA in the mid-60s and allegedly was responsible for ordering the hit on Philip Neri, which was one of the incidents that kicked off the shoe war of 1968. I show that he was one of the guys who was able to walk away in good standing. William Billy Amador was from San Bernardino and had a C number. I show he was MA in mid-90s. Manuel Chapo Amaro was from Chiques. He was sponsored into the MA in the early 70s by Richie Ruiz from Bakers, but I don't believe he was validated until the 1980s. That's what I'm saying. Only CDC or the feds can determine if an individual is a Mexican Mafia member or not. It often takes a long time to validate somebody. And the way things are right now, I don't know how they're doing it, because the criteria has drastically changed. I show that Chapo was killed by Ralph Lopez in 1992, and Ralphie Lopez, who was also from Chiques himself, was killed by La M in January 1993 for Chapo's murder. That case was not actually solved until 2003. His brother was Robert Papitas Amaro. Papitas killed an individual named Ruben Martinez in 1979, and then a couple months later killed another guy named Ladislao Gonzalez. Papitas was given MA status in the early 1970s, but eventually ended up PCing up and died in 1981. So I hate to leave you hanging, but I have to stop right there. We'll continue with part 2 of Alpha Last Names of Mexican Mafia members over the past 60 plus years. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for gangsters, cops, and politicians.